Thanks for the invite. I want everyone to put your hands together for just a second and thank Ben, Andy, and Wade for this awesome conference that they put together. I know they're all running on about 2 hours of sleep, and they've just done a lot. And I think it's also awesome, all the orange shirts, everybody who's volunteering. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here. These things are a lot of work to put together. It's hard for me just to get 5 family members together for a barbecue on Sunday. So my name's Dave Oldham. I'm the COO and co-founder of a company called Outro. And I have 22 years of software product development experience. I built 21 products in those 22 years. 6 of them were failures, and 15 of those have been successes. And I'm trying to figure out if I've learned more from the failures or from the successes. There's some interesting kind of commentary on blogs kind of combating the Silicon Valley, fail fast because you learn from your failures. But I've also learned some interesting things from my successes. I founded 3 companies. The first one was O-Codes. The second one was Nuvi, and this third one is Outro. I have an MBA in entrepreneurship from Berkeley and an MBA in economics from Columbia. And all that means is I'm about half as smart as the rest of you because it took me twice as much schooling to learn what you guys already know. But I love the outdoors and I love living in Utah. It's a great place to build companies and to work in tech because there's a lot of fun outdoor stuff that you get to do too. This is what I care about the most. I've got a 7-year-old son that's turning 8 in 2 weeks, and a beautiful wife that I always tease her, she must be either sort of blind and sort of not that selective. And usually when we're out walking in public, people whisper themselves that guy must be so rich. So I'm used to it, and she's definitely my better half. Today I'm going to talk about this idea of if you build it. I'm going to share a few ideas, a few concepts from some of my product failures and successes, and I'm going to introduce you to, or reconfirm if you're already very familiar with it, this idea about this customer development model and business model canvas. I'm going to share an insight that I've learned that was kind of a surprise to me, and that is there's this tricky little thing about market research, and then I'll close it up with a couple of ideas about just design. But I want to start out, hopefully the audio works.
Annie, what was that?
What was what?
That voice just now, what was it?
We didn't hear anything.
All right.
If you build it, he will come.
Okay, you must have heard that.
Sorry. Hey, come on in to dinner. Let's go, Pumpkin.
So raise your hands, how many people recognize that movie? Nice. Field of Dreams, 1989, when I was a senior in high school. That ages me a little bit, but for the few of you who may not have seen that, it's worth seeing. It's a good movie, but this guy, played by Kevin Costner, moves out from the city out into this farm and buys this farm and starts farming. He's kind of a novice farmer. And at some point, he has this dream or this epiphany that he's supposed to build a baseball field. So he plows his corn and builds this baseball field out in the middle of this Iowa cornfield, and everyone thinks he's crazy. It totally is nuts. The nice thing is that it ends well, the end, but that's Hollywood, right? It's not what happens in real life. So in 2001, we had the dot-com bust, and a whole ton of companies that were really well-funded with millions and tens of millions of dollars all just imploded, and there were a lot of really, really smart guys that had companies that were really, really talented but had complete failures, just completely imploded. And so one of these guys turned out to be one of my professors named Steve Blank, and he came up with all of these ideas about why smart people who had great product ideas just completely failed, and he put it into this book called The 4 Steps to the Epiphany. Then one of his students, who was a year ahead of me in school, named Eric Reese, took that stuff that he'd learned from the 4 Steps to the Epiphany and started applying it in a startup that he was working on called MView. And MView, if you guys have heard of that before, for those of you who don't know, it is kind of like this virtual chat rooms with avatars that you could customize and create your own avatars and give them like their own personalities, and then you could buy all these accessories and bling them up and everything. And it was completely failing. It was going to implode. And he actually applied a lot of the ideas that Steve taught us in school, and it started working, and it turned out to be a big, big success. So Eric exited out of MView and then put together all of his notes about how he actually applied the concepts that Steve had taught us and how it was successful in his company, and started sharing it at conferences like this, and then wrote a book and started sharing it internationally and globally, and the rest is history. Then shortly after that, a guy came along named Alex Osterwalder, and he took the stuff that Steve and Eric had been working on, and he created this really beautiful, very visual way of looking at the customer development model that Steve had come up with, and he called it business model generation. And then his second work with some other co-authors is the value proposition design, or the value proposition canvas. You saw glimpses of that earlier in Tracy's talk, and you've heard other people allude to these concepts of customer development. But I consider these 4 books to kind of be the canon, or my religious library as far as product development and product design go. So I highly recommend them if you don't have. If you haven't seen these, especially these 2 from a design perspective. This one reads like a textbook. This one's got a little bit more stories to it. And then these are very, very visual, very appealing books to kind of introduce you to the concepts that Steve and Eric talk about. So in the next 30 minutes, I'm going to go through the business model canvas in a little bit of detail, and then interspersed, I'll kind of share some of the personal lessons that I've learned along the way. And I realized that as I was watching the first talk this morning, I definitely need more awesome gifts in my presentation. So I'm right in the prime, post-lunch nap time hour. So if you fall asleep with some of these black and white slides, I apologize. And I'm really going to try and figure out how to work in like cats on bacon in like one of these sections or something, because that was an awesome presentation, by the way. So I told you I have had 3 companies that I started since business school, and one of them was a failure. The first startup I did after school called O-Codes. But the next one was a pretty big success, and it's still a successful company. I still have a significant amount of equity, but I've left there and started this third company called Outro. I'm the co-founder. It wasn't actually my idea, but I was lucky enough to start working with these guys because I believe in what they're trying to accomplish. And what I wanted to point out is that this first company that I started, O-Codes, I actually did follow the customer development model and had a lot of different hypotheses that we were testing out and a lot of things that we tried with customers, and ultimately none of them worked. So the takeaway message is that while the customer development model significantly improves your likelihood for success, it's not a guarantee. You might just learn after you've gotten a lot of customer feedback that your idea just kind of sucks and nobody wants it. And one of the main takeaways, in fact, probably the biggest takeaway from my presentation, if you only remember one thing, besides the fact that my wife married a really rich guy, is that what customers tell you they want or tell you they're going to do isn't always what they actually do. In fact, oftentimes it's the complete opposite when they're actually put in the scenario to take specific action. In fact, we even learned that in isolation, customers in labs that were kind of we thought we were doing user research, but they would actually tell us different things and act differently in the isolated, pristine environment of a lab because their real emotions and their real, how they would act in the real world wasn't exactly simulated in a laboratory environment. So we found that oftentimes the only way we could figure out what a customer was really going to do and how they really felt was they had to use the product in a real scenario. And I think that was kind of actually a surprise to us because we thought, man, if we follow this magical map, it's going to just guarantee that we're successful in everything, and it's not necessarily guaranteed. And I'll come back to that in just a little bit. But customer development model always starts with the customer. So the most important thing about design and building a great product, which many of you know and you've heard already in some of these other talks, is you have to know your customer, and you have to know your customer on an intimate level. In fact, some of the biggest successes I've had was when I was building a product that I needed really badly. So I had the advantage of I was the customer that I was trying to solve the problem for. But I've also learned that you can't just ask your customers what they want because they'll tell you sometimes misleading things or tell you things that wouldn't be the best. And everyone has a different set of problems and perspectives. So you have to ask enough questions and you have to do enough homework about your customers that you really understand what their pain points are without really doing exactly what they tell you to do. So who are we creating value for, and who are our most important customers? Is your product going after a mass market like Coca-Cola or McDonald's where with minimal set of options, or one product you're trying to reach like everyone in the world? Or are you going after a niche market where you're selling high-end luxury watches or a specific type of software that works for a very, very narrow niche? Are you going after a segmented market? Are you trying to reach different segments in different types of markets? So Harley-Davidson is aggressively going after female riders and younger riders, and they kind of started out with this badass, bearded, tatted, that was their core audience, but now you've got like the accountants and the lawyers and the doctors and the weekend warriors who are buying their Harleys and getting leathered up, and Harley's got to think about how do they approach all these different segments. Are you going after a diversified market? So Amazon started selling books, and then they started selling everything, but they also offer Amazon Web Services to tech companies. They also own Mechanical Turk, which is an outsourced kind of task management thing, and I just read that they're building a competitor to YouTube, so they're going to get into streaming and hosting video. Or are you going for a multi-sided platform where it takes two pieces or two types of people for the market to work? The traditional one that you learn about is credit card companies and merchants. So Amex doesn't exist unless there's enough merchants that will accept the card and there's enough people that will sign up for the card and carry the card around, right? But more modern examples are Airbnb and Uber, right? Uber doesn't exist unless there's enough people willing to drive in their own cars and pick up strangers and drive them around. And there's enough people willing to ride with people who aren't a part of an official taxi company but are just driving around in their cars. And then even creepier is Airbnb, right? Like when people heard about Airbnb for the first time, it was like, there's no way in hell that is going to work, right? Ain't no way I'm letting random strangers come in and sleep on my couch or sleep in my basement or whatever. So double-sided market, they had to have enough people willing to rent their homes or their couches, and they had enough people who were willing to go sleep on somebody's couch and sleep in somebody's room, and it's working. And both those companies are disrupting big industries that have been around for a long time. At Outro, we have a really unique problem, and we're still trying to figure it out. We haven't figured it out 100%. But we have this customer, represented here by the R. We call them requesters. So we have people who want to get introductions to other people for sales or for hiring or for meeting investors or whatever. Those are our immediate customers. They sign up on our platform. But in order for Outro to work, we also have connectors, which are people that are in these requesters' networks that they say, hey, will you make an introduction for me to these people in your network, which we call prospects. So what we have to understand at Outro is not only the psychology and what makes the requesters tick, but we also have to understand what makes the connectors tick, what motivates them, why they would make an introduction or why they wouldn't make an introduction. And then we have to understand the prospects, why they would accept an introduction and whether or not they think it's a high-quality introduction. So we refer to this as the art of the intro, and there's definitely a lot of art as well as science involved, and we're still working on it. We haven't figured it out 100% yet. It's a big challenge. But one thing that we use that helps us is called the Customer Empathy Map. And it's a framework for really kind of trying to get inside the head of your customers. And for us, we have to do that for the requesters, the connectors, and the prospects. But you start by trying to understand how they think and what they feel, what really matters to them, what they're preoccupied with, what their worries and concerns are. You have to understand what they see, their environment and the friends that they have, maybe even where they grew up, or racial influences, geographic influences, cultural influences, religious influences, everything that makes that person tick and why they would make certain decisions in certain situations. You have to understand what they hear, the environments that they operate in, what the prevailing attitudes and mindsets are, what people that they listen to who influence them, what those people are saying. And then we have to pay attention to what they say and they do. And these two things, I mean, that's really kind of where this critical thing is like we found that customers will say one thing and then do something totally different when they have to get out their credit card and enter those numbers in, or when they have to push send on an email that's going to go out to like 50 of their friends, or if they're about to share something on social media, right? Like that is the moment where suddenly they have this emotion that might have even surprised them. It's not that people lie to you when you're doing market research. They don't even know. They're not even sure how they're going to feel in that situation until the moment of truth comes, and they're like, oh, I feel really creepy about this, or I don't think I want to do this, right? That's the moment of truth. But all of this adds up to helping us understand what their pains and what their gains are. And if you can really get to the bottom of the pains and the gains, then you're either solving a problem to remove the pain, or you're providing in them a new gain, something that maybe they never even knew that they wanted until they see it, and they're like, oh my gosh, it's a hoverboard, it's so awesome. Know your customer. This is a familiar quote probably to most of you. It's been repeated many times by Steve Jobs and other people. Henry Ford famously said, if I would have asked my customer what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. So knowing your customer is a lot more than just asking them what they want and what they think. So once we understand the customers that we're going after and the segments that are really important to us, then we jump into the middle of the model and we start focusing on the value propositions. What is our product going to provide to these people that they'll care about? And which one of our customers' problems are we solving? And are we solving pain, or are we giving them some kind of unique gain, or is it a combination? What bundles of products and services are we offering to each segment that we're targeting? And what customer needs are we satisfying? I tend to think of this, and I think the best way to think about this is in terms of jobs to be done. And that's also been alluded to in the earlier speeches, but the jobs to be done framework, I'll talk about in just a second. It's a good way to think about this. But what value proposition are we offering? Newness? Is it something brand new? Are we letting people customize stuff that has been around for a long time? Are we increasing performance of an existing product or an existing offering? Are we providing a service that a company is currently doing or a person is currently doing that they don't want to do, and we're going to do that for them? Is our value proposition based on design? Apple's kind of become a very wealthy company, arguably largely based on just taking products that mostly already existed. I mean, they didn't invent the MP3 player, they didn't invent the phone, they didn't even invent the tablet, but they've taken those existing ideas and using great design have captured a large portion of the market. Is it brand or status? And embarrassing, I didn't do this on purpose, but I've got Stance socks on right now. Who else has Stance socks? Stance is a company that uses brand, right? They're socks, but people think they're cool, and the same guys did the same thing before that at Skull Candy. They took headphones and tried to make black, boring headphones into something really cool and built a brand around it, and they're doing the exact same thing with Stance socks. You could think of Mission belts or Tom shoes or The Honest Company, Jessica Alba, taking existing products but kind of creating a unique brand story around it and capturing value that way. Are we basing it on price? Are we just going to make something way cheaper than the competitors out there and undercut them on price? Are we going to reduce someone else's costs? Is our product going to provide to companies or to individuals a way to reduce the cost that they're currently paying to do something? Are we reducing risk? Are we making things more accessible? Or are we providing a convenience to them that they don't already have? So in this jobs to be done framework, there's kind of three ways to think about it. You can think about the functional part of the job, the emotional part of the job, and the social part of the job. So let's take, for example, a couple buying a baby seat for their new infant. The functional job to be done is they want this baby seat to protect their baby from getting hurt. But the emotional job is that they want to feel secure. They want to feel safe driving around, that if they got in an accident, that their baby would be protected. They want that sense of security. But then there's a social job too. They want other couples to perceive them to be responsible adults who care about their kids. And this is where you get into like, I've got the X5000 baby seat. It does this, it's got extra padding, right? Like that's all the social job to be done, because arguably it's not necessarily safer in an accident, but I'm bragging about it to my friends because I've got such a badass baby seat, right? Social job to be done. There are barriers to the jobs to be done that we also have to pay attention to when we're designing products. So how hard is it going to be for us to get users to change what they're currently doing and do it the way that we want them to do? And that is one of the things that kills products right out of the gate. It's just too hard to change. There's not a competitor. The competition is change the way I'm currently doing things. How hard is it for people to use? And that kind of plays into this thing too, is are we making something that is going to take like a rocket science degree to use, or is this something that's really plug and play that people can use it really, really easily? How much time does it take to use it? So are we offering a value proposition that people get instantly? And in today's age, you pretty much have to offer instant gratification, or people won't wait around to see the value that your product is going to provide. Is it accessible? So we can make this thing, but we can't. There's no way for us to distribute it. So how are we going to get it into the hands of the people that want it? And is it going to be affordable enough for us to produce this thing at a price point that people are willing to pay for it that's still profitable for us? So once we understand the value propositions and we know the customer segments, then we start to focus on the relationships that we're going to have to create with these customers to deliver these value propositions to them. So that's what bridges the gap between these two segments of the customer development canvas. So with respect to customer relationships, what type of relationship do we need to establish with each customer? Which ones have we established already? How are they integrated with the rest of our business model, and how costly are they? So do we have to provide phone support? Do we have to have face-to-face interactions with our customers? Can we do completely self-serve on our website? Or is it a combination of self-serve and human touch? Are we going to provide concierge and kind of VIP treatment for certain customers that pay a certain amount? Are we going to generate a community where customers can help each other solve their own problems? Or are we going to rely on co-creation? And YouTube is probably one of the best examples, right? They got their own customers to create content that other customers consume, and YouTube just facilitated that whole thing. eBay is another one of co-creation. Once we know the customer relationships that we need to establish, then we need to think about the channels that we're going to use to communicate. How are we going to reach the customers? How are we currently reaching them? How are these channels integrated? Which ones work best? Which ones are most cost efficient? And how are we integrating them with our customer routines? So how are we making it easy for them to do what they already do? There are direct and indirect channels. The direct channels are when you're going straight to the customer from the company or from your product. That's you have a direct sales team, or you're selling directly from your website, phone and email contact, or directly via social media. But there's indirect channels too, where you might have to work through franchise or set up franchises in order to grow as quickly as you want and enable other people to sell your product for you. And then they're going to be the ones who are communicating directly with the customers, partners and affiliates or wholesalers. And that creates a whole unique set of problems that you have to think about in who's touching your customer and what kind of an experience is your customer having with your product if you're not the one directly contacting them, if there are people in the middle. And you might also have to use different types of channels at different points in your relationship with your customer. So when you're in the awareness phase versus when they're evaluating your product to when they purchase, then you deliver it, and then after you've delivered it, you might have to use a combination of direct and indirect channels to accomplish all of that in order to provide the best possible experience for your customer. And we have to take all of that into consideration. Then once we've got all of that together, then we can finally start to understand how that plays into the revenue streams and how we're going to make money. So what value propositions are our customers really willing to pay for? Now this goes back to my key takeaway is people will tell you, especially to your face if they don't want to offend you, like, hey, check out this awesome widget that I got. And they're like, oh, that's awesome. I would totally buy 20 of those. And then you like say, okay, get out your wallet and buy 20 of them. Like, oh yeah, like shoot, forgot my wallet. I'll get back to you on that. And then they don't, right? So there's this huge difference between people telling you what they want and then actually getting out their wallet and buying, which I think Kickstarter is one of the greatest inventions of all time. I wish I would have thought of it because it's a way to kind of throw your idea out there and then get people to actually pay you money before your thing even exists, and then validate your idea before you have to go invest a ton of money in building the thing. Now, once you pre-sell it, you better deliver on it. That's a whole nother story for another day, but it's a great way to kind of validate your idea. So if you're in a position to use Kickstarter or Indiegogo or pre-sell your product, do it. Because if you can get people to actually get out their wallet and pay for something, then you know you're onto a real idea. So there's all different types of ways to make money from your product, and you might use a combination of these. They're not mutually exclusive. You might employ different pricing strategies, and you have to think about how you're going to price your product and what combination of models you might need to use. And is it fixed or dynamic? Or are you going to have just set prices or tiered pricing models that's just the same for everyone? Or you're going to negotiate on an individual basis? And you see some of this on the internet where that's kind of a combination where they'll have like the bronze, the silver, the gold package, and then like the super huge package, call us for more information, where they basically just kind of make up some huge number after they talk to you and try and make as much money as possible, right? So all of this is critical for us to understand how our thing is going to actually make money. Now, if you're not in it to make money, you can substitute this for what is the end result that you want to get. Do you want people to vote? Do you want people to do something? Do you want people to recycle? Do you want people to support your cause or sign up for something? So there are substitutions for just making money, but the idea is once we understand all of this, we can figure out like what's really going to feed down into that, and we'll call it the revenue bucket, but it doesn't have to actually equate to dollars or money. So how do you figure this stuff out? Well, the first thing is you got to get out of the building and you got to do customer research, right? But remember what I said about market research. You go out, you start asking people all these questions. The types of questions you ask them is really critical. You can ask people leading questions and get the exact answers that you wanted to hear in order to validate your own pride and your own idea, but they might be not even telling you the truth. And so, like I said, you have to be careful about what you're asking, how you're asking those questions, and then you really have to build an MVP or a prototype or something that they can touch and feel in a real scenario in order to see how they're really, really going to act. And this is it right there. Key takeaway is what people told us that they would do wasn't what they really did when it came time to act, and there was no other way for us to simulate that until they actually had to touch the product or take some kind of action or do something. That's hard sometimes for managers, for CEOs who are kind of removed from what you're doing as a product manager or designer. It's hard for investors to swallow, especially if you're a publicly traded company. I've worked in a publicly traded company for a while, and if you're focused on quarterly results, it's really hard to say, well, we have to build this thing, and we have to test it, and we have to get it in people's hands before we really, really know if it's going to work or not, and if they're willing to pay the price that we want. So that's a tricky thing that you have to navigate the politics of that. But once we've kind of got a pretty good idea of what we need to do to create value, now we're going to start thinking about what's it going to cost us to deliver that value. And this side of the canvas is all related to the cost structure. A lot of products and a lot of startups fail because they think they're going to go build something awesome, and it may even be awesome, but they don't really think about all of the costs that go into building this thing, and if they can end up being profitable or providing something for someone where the benefits outweigh the costs. So we start with key activities. We say, what key activities do our value propositions require? Our distribution channels, our customer relationships, our revenue streams, and what do we need to build this thing? Is it people? And what types of resources are we going to need? What types of activities are we going to need to do? And it ties directly into the resources. So if we're doing these types of activities, what types of resources do we need to support those activities? So do we need physical resources? Are we a software company where we just need lots of developers and lots of designers, and then we're going to need support people and marketing people and accounting people? Is it physical resources, like we're building a hoverboard, so we're going to need parts and we're going to have to order parts from all these different suppliers. Maybe we'll make some of the parts ourselves, and then maybe we'll just get all the rest of the parts and assemble them together. And then how much is that going to cost us, and what can we do with that? What financial resources are we going to need? Can we bootstrap this thing? Can we pre-sell on Kickstarter and generate enough revenue to support our production? Or are we going to have to raise money from investors? Or are we going to have to convince a big customer/partner to prepay us for something that we're about to build for them? And all of those models work. You just have to think through what's going to be the best scenario for you. What do we need? Intellectual resources. Is this something that we need to patent in order to protect it? Do we need to copyright it? What kind of a brand are we going to create around it, and how do we protect the integrity of that brand? So once we've done the key activities and key resources, then we focus on key partnerships. And we need to understand if we need partners at all. If we do need partners, who are the key partners? Who are our key suppliers? What key resources are we acquiring from those partners? And what key activities are the partners going to perform? Now, I've had a lot of experiences with doing partnerships, and I've had some amazing partnerships, and I've had some horrible partnerships. And what I've learned from that is that typically I've found that the very best partnerships are where you and your partner are equally matched with respect to the value that you're providing to each other. If there's a huge discrepancy between you're providing a ton of value and they're not, or they're providing a ton of value and you're not so much, it's almost inevitable that that relationship's going to fail. So you need the partnership to be based on the greediest, most self-motivated, selfish behaviors where both parties are incentivized by those, greedy behaviors to stay in the partnership and to bust their butt for the partnership to work. Otherwise, there's a really high likelihood that that partnership's not going to last for very long. So now we know this side, we can start calculating the actual costs. And we got to figure out what are the most important costs in case we had to cut costs. Which ones could we give up? Which things could we cut out? Is our product more cost-driven? So we're just trying to make as many of these widgets as possible, as cheaply as possible. Or is it value-driven? We're willing to invest a lot of money into building this thing because we're going to sell to a market that values the quality that went into that, and they're willing to pay us a huge premium for that quality. So We also need to think about the fixed costs. Do we need office space or not? Can we work remotely or not? What kind of salaries are we going to have to pay people to get the right people on the team with the right skills? Do we need to offer benefits to be competitive to get them to come work for us, or equity? What are the variable costs? Do we have to have servers? And are the servers requirements going to increase as more people start using the product? Are we going to have to pay salespeople commissions? And are the commissions going to have to get bigger and bigger and bigger to keep these guys motivated? Or how much are we going to invest in marketing? Do we need to do traditional marketing? And what kind of materials do we have to buy? If we're building a hoverboard, we're going to need all these pieces and all these parts unless we're able to manufacture them all ourselves. And even if we do manufacture them ourselves, what are the raw materials that we're going to need in order to build that stuff? And the tools that we're going to use to build that stuff. And there's economies of scale that come into play, but you kind of have to think of it in terms of the worst case scenario. Could we build this thing and sell this thing at a profit if we just built like one at a time in the worst case scenario, and then everything else from there is gravy? So we think about all the things that play into the costs. Now we've got a model that shows us on the right-hand side everything that's going to help us generate revenue, and then everything that's going to cost. And on one piece of paper, this is where the magic comes. You can have this big board up in your office. In one piece of paper, you can validate, and you can use this model for a single feature inside of a product. You can use it for a brand new product, or you can even use it as a model for your new startup, your whole business concept. So it can be applied for a lot of things, but it helps you kind of figure out who you're targeting and what they value and what will they do or pay for, and then what's it going to cost you to deliver that, and can you feasibly deliver that thing to them in a way that you end up in a viable business scenario where it's worth doing it. So I'm going to close with a couple of thoughts about design. This quote is my own quote, but in my opinion, great product design is so much more than just a pretty user interface. Great design takes into consideration the entire user experience, from the moment they interact with your company and your product until the moment they leave, as well as everything required to build and deliver that experience behind the scenes. So one of the things that I try and educate the designers that are on my team and the designers I've worked with is, your job is way bigger than just making this screen look pretty. Design impacts every aspect of everything our company does, and we need to be a well-designed company in order to develop or deploy and deliver a well-designed product. So every touch point, how our customer support team interacts with the customers and how they experience everything that they do and every interaction they have with the company, it's all design, and it's all product design, in my opinion. Early in my career, I was exposed to this awesome metaphor. It's one of my favorites with regard to how to think about product and great product design. So, for example, a sporting good manufacturer, this is how they see their arrow. It's got a tungsten tip arrowhead for clean entry and perfect weight balance. It's got a military-grade binding that won't loosen when it hits hard surfaces. It's got a diamond edge arrow blades that cut through bone and muscle like butter. It's got a carbon fiber core for reinforced strength and durability. It's got an industrial strength aluminum shaft that provides trueness of flight and incredible stiffness. It's got glow-in-the-dark graphics for easy retrieval in dark locations. It's got Gorilla Glue on all the feather connections. And those feathers are made out of aerodynamic hawk feathers for low drag and high rotation. And to top it all off, it's got a hyperlight bowstring catch that's light but durable. Does this sound like how you think about your product? Is this how your marketing team describes your product, right? It's got all these kick-ass features. Look at our arrow. It's so freaking awesome. But the point is, pun intended, that all that really matters is the point, which is the tip of the arrow, what the customer or the target sees if the arrow is on target, right? All that matters is how it's going to change their life, what impact it's going to have, what it's going to make their life better or do differently for them. Customers don't often care about all of that really awesome crap. They just really care about what it's going to do for them. Someone I admire is Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, a Frenchman. He was a mathematician, a poet, a musician, a pilot, and he was a designer. And one of my favorite all-time quotes from him is, "Perfection is achieved not when there is nothing more to add, but when there is nothing left to take away. As product designers and as product developers, we have this tendency to want to add more and more and more and more bells and whistles, more features, add more stuff on there, but resist the temptation. In fact, one of the hardest skills to develop as a product designer is to figure out what not to do and what to take out of your product than it is to figure out what to add to your product. I'll stop here. This is the parting thought, but my dad had this cartoon hanging next to his desk as I grew up as a little kid, and I always loved it. And the sad thing is that as I actually got into my own career and started working, I personally have experienced every single one of these. So I'll walk you through this. This is what the customer said they wanted. This is how the product leader understood it. This is how the analyst designed it. This is how the programmer wrote it. This is how the consultant described it. This is how the project was documented. And this is where I always laugh because I'm like, that's so true, right? This is what operations installed. This is how the customer was billed. This is how the product was supported. But this is what the customer really needed. So it's funny, we chuckle because all of us have probably had these exact experiences. We know this. But the real key takeaway is the difference between the first and the last frames. What the customer tells you they want isn't really what they need most of the time. So I'll leave you with my one parting thought that I've emphasized a few times is in order to create great products, you have to understand your customer intimately enough that you can know what their pains and their gains are, and you can supply a solution to that problem or something new that they never even dreamed and imagined they wanted. Because if you just ask them, they won't tell you that, and you have to be the one who's a creator and comes up with the new ideas. Thank you very much.